JD, good to have you on board. We always appreciate you when you take some of your time to spend it with us here on the program, where intellectual anarchy is encouraged and nurtured for now. ... You're a little slow on the trigger there, Brad. Brad is producing the program. Marcelo working. Wasn't he a little slow on that? I mean, there was just too much of a gap in there. We can fix it in post. We can tighten it up. Poll question up there for you today at the website, jerrydoyle.com. Congress has voted to give the USPS, for those of you not familiar with the acronym, that is the United States Postal Service, an $11 billion, they're calling it a cash infusion. Not a bailout, a cash infusion. It's going to delay closures, avoid layoffs, and continue Saturday deliveries until after the November elections. What do you say to that? 6% say, that makes sense in this economy. 6% say, old people need their junk mail. And 88% of the people say, isn't vote buying illegal? Yes, it is, unless you're an esteemed member of Congress. Now, with regard to the comment up there, that's not my comment about old people needing their junk mail. That comment comes courtesy of the Senate Majority Leader, whorehouse Harry Reid.
Elderly Americans rely on the United States Postal Service. Madam President, I'll come home tonight and here in my home here in Washington, and there'll be some mail there. A lot of it is what some people refer to as junk mail. But for the people that are sending that mail, it's very important. And talking about seniors love to get the junk mail. It's sometimes their only way of communicating or feeling they're part of the real world.
We should be checking Whorehouse Harry for termites because you don't get any more wooden than that guy. Yeah, he talked about his, when I go to my home here in Washington, D.C., the little quaint little town of Searchlight, Nevada, where Whorehouse Harry comes from, and he lives at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington, D.C. He's just a humble little man from a humble little town, from humble little beginnings and a humble little background, and learned to swim in a whorehouse swimming pool, and that's why we gave him the moniker of Whorehouse Harry Reid. But he says, hey, old people, they need their junk mail. Well, I guess Congress needs to buy votes because they decided to take $11 billion and give it to the Postal Service, and they want to delay what they're calling controversial decisions that would involve closing post offices and ending Saturday delivery. Now, you would think that they might want to get an exploit on something like this, because the Senate has offered this lifeline to the nearly bankrupt USPS. Now, let's take a look at what the Postal Service does. 500 million pieces of mail a day, 8 million jobs. And according to Senator Joe Lieberman, the supposed independent from Connecticut, the bill co-sponsor, he said the Postal Service is an iconic American institution. This legislation will change the USPS so it can stay alive throughout the 21st century. Now, that would, I guess, be considered to be an expert because he's a senator and there's only 50 of them. So, wow, in such limited number, 100 of them, they must be such held in such esteem that, God, they must know what they're talking about. But then we could go to the Postmaster General, Patrick Donahoe, and he criticizes the decision by Congress to attempt to buy votes for the November election because he says this doesn't do anything to stem the financial losses. He said we're just going to have to return to Congress to get more emergency help. And he said it's totally inappropriate in these economic times to keep unneeded facilities open. He said there's simply not enough mail in our system today, and it's also inappropriate to delay the implementation of 5-day delivery. Now, the Postmaster General knows the problems because he's the Postmaster General. Joe Lieberman is just a crook who wears a tie and a little pin on his lapel that says, I'm an esteemed member of the 112th Congress. So the postal head dude who realizes there's not enough mail in the system to sustain the system, that we're losing money, we're bleeding money, and he says, look, we have to do something. We got to make some cutbacks. They want to close mail processing centers. They want to close post offices. They want to save $6.5 billion a year. Donahue said he was ready to begin making those cuts May 15th of this year. But if Congress had something to offer that might help, he's open to some suggestions. So Congress looks at the situation and says, what are we looking at here? Well, we're looking at all of those postal employees. We're looking at early buyouts of 100,000 employees. We're looking at closures in districts that congressmen and senators represent, and that doesn't represent to them to be a good deal politically. Financially, they don't care because it's not their money. It's our money. Now, you as a congressman or woman or a candidate for Congress can't go around and say, I'll give you $50 if you vote for me. That's illegal. You can't make a quid pro quo. If you give me this money, I'll get this done for you. Oh, I guess you can. Those are called lobbyists. But anyway, the law says you can't offer something for compensation, campaign contribution, or contribution in kind. Because they're very specific at the FEC. If you go to fec.gov and you take a look at how meticulously they go through campaign finance records, you'll come to know that they watch this stuff closely. But what they can't do anything about is Congress creating an $11 billion slush fund disguised as a cash infusion to the Postal Service so that they make sure that no centers close, no employees lose their jobs, and junk mail still goes to old people. And they're going to take a look at doing the heavy lifting when? After the November election. Now, where did the $11 billion figure come from? Because this is important, too. One of the things that I hate to see happen is the Postal Service getting abused by people who don't understand how it works. The Postal Service does not receive any taxpayer money for its operations. Understand that part of it. Everyone thinks, oh, it's the United States Post Office. It's the taxpayers that go to fund the postal operations. Not so. But even though taxpayers don't fund the post office, Congress has the decision-making process over the post office. You would think you would let the post office do what the post office does, seeing as how Congress can't even do what it does. But that's a whole different story. But, Jerry, you just said taxpayers' money is not going to be involved. What about that $11 billion? Funny you should ask. Because the $11 billion was a slush fund that Congress told the post office they had to put together. So when you look at the price of stamps or raising the cost of doing business with the post office, they have to raise their prices to meet the demands that Congress places on them in the areas like establishing these retirement fund escrow accounts. So the post office says, okay, Congress makes the rules, so we're going to put that money into that escrow account. Then what did Congress do? Congress stole the money out of that account so they can overspend and misappropriate monies in other areas. And now that the Postal Service is looking at these problems of having to do something immediately to be fiscally responsible, the only thing Congress cares about is votes in November. So Congress votes to give the $11 billion back to the Postal Service that they stole in the first place. And the Postal Service is the ones that constantly get the knocks. That, oh, they're just going postal. They're just a bunch of psychos. Don't they understand? They do understand. The Postal Service understands. The head of the Postal Service says there's not enough mail in the system to sustain the system. Congress says, we don't care. We want to sustain votes through the November election. Even Senator John McAmnesty, Johnny McCain of Arizona, he said, this, of course, kicks the can down the road. He said, this fails to address the long-term fixes. It delays major decisions. He says, we'll be back on the floor addressing this issue again, but when will they address it? They'll address it when it's not critical to their election or re-election. And guess what? 4 mail processing centers were saved in Nevada, the home to whorehouse Harry Reid, who said old people need their junk mail. And they're only going to delay this issue until after the election, when it's all that it's ever about. It's about their political power, their political present and future, and it's about their political party. It has nothing to do with making decisions that should be made on a business basis to make sure the sustainability of the post office continues to be what it needs to be. So when you're thinking about giving the postal worker a little bit of lip, or the guy or gal behind the counter because you had to wait in line, maybe what you ought to do is just send a letter off to your esteemed member of Congress, or maybe a email, or maybe a phone call, and just say, hey, thanks for doing the heavy lifting. Thanks for doing what needed to be done. And I have an even better idea. Why don't you, Congress, get out of the business of regulating the post office and maybe spend a little bit of time trying to figure out why you guys have such a low approval rating? Get yourselves fixed first before you try and fix everything else.
The Jerry Doyle Show.
And as Bob Barker would say, don't forget to spay or neuter your congressman. 800-876-4123 is the number. Or congresswoman. I wouldn't want to appear to be sexist. Immigration, another election issue. We're going to talk about that with Ross Kaminsky at the bottom of the hour. Joel Gilbert has a new DVD out, Dreams from My Real Father, about Barack Obama. And why does it take so long and cost so much to bring new drugs onto the marketplace? Ovik Roy, Forbes.com blogger of The Apothecary and a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute Center for Medical Progress, is going to give us that information. That and a whole lot more here on the program today. I'm Jerry Doyle. Join me.
Seniors love to get junk mail. It's sometimes their only way of communicating or feeling they're part of the real world.
This is the Jerry Doyle Show.